Okay, so good morning. Believe I just hit share here. There we go. Good morning. This is Chris Jones with the University of Arizona, Gila County Cooperative Extension. You are here today for our next season, our next show of the Garden and Country Extension webinar series. We are hosting the gardening classes at the Payson Community Garden. Our class today is about how to water your garden. And we have Dan McEwen with us, who is a gardener at the Payson Community Garden. Just a little bit about these webinars. They are a weekly Zoom webinar. We do them, they're 1 hour. We want to get done before lunch here. So Thursdays at 11 in Arizona. Right now, between February 11 and April 15, I'm hosting the spring gardening classes for the Payson Community Garden in Northern Gila County. And the recordings are posted at the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension YouTube channel. I'm pleased to let you know that we had a few technical difficulties with the last two presentations with getting cut out. I'm sure that's not going to happen today. But I worked with my colleagues on campus and they got those spliced together and they are up and available for viewing presently. And the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. So welcome. Today's topic is how to water your garden. Here's our agenda. Thank you for those of you who joined us early to log in. I'm Chris Jones, your moderator. Dan McEwen is our presenter. He'll get started here with a video we've got. And then we'll be watching the video. We'll be doing a question and answer discussion with Dan when that is over. So as that is going along, feel free to put your questions into the chat box. We like to use that chat box, but if you put questions in the Q&A, that'll work too. If you put them in both, I just have to work my way through the list and I'll get to your questions. So sometimes we do get the questions on there. And I shared in the chat box an evaluation link. I'll share that again, but please take your time out to click that. It's just about 2 or 3 minutes, maybe even a minute or two, to put down, what you learned here and share some information with me. Appreciate that. This is our presenter, Dan McEwen. He's a Payson Community Gardener, and he will be speaking here presently. So I'm going to stop that share, introduce you to Dan. We've been chatting with him a little bit before we hit the record button. So Dan, just a little bit about the video we're going to watch, and we'll get started here in a second. So how you doing?
Good. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, today it's all about watering. Let you know that we will do an introduction about how we water and like to water in the garden today. But there will be another more detailed presentation probably later in the season about some of the mechanics of how we set up our auto watering systems. So you can look forward to that as well. What I will present today are actually pre-recorded. The first part of it is a pre-recorded PowerPoint presentation where I just discuss some of the general principles of vegetable garden watering from kind of seed to maturity. And then after that's finished, recently we recorded a video that we actually shot out at the community garden here at one of my gardens, and talk a little bit, just kind of a snapshot of how I like to set up my auto watering system, just to get you started in thinking about if you have a garden here at the community garden, how you might want to set that up. So
I'm really looking forward to it. One thing I know about watering at the Payson Community Garden is the city only wants to give as much water as they have to. And so it requires you guys to practice some water conservation techniques and still get these nice big green gardens. And so with that, I'll go ahead and see if we're successful getting this video started. And let me hit the share button here. I'm going to turn off the floating panel, put that on full screen, and if you can hear it, we're all good to go.
Water, wind to water.
Matter of fact, try that again.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'll spend about the next 20 minutes talking about the basics of watering our garden, several aspects of how to water, when to water, how much to water. Try to touch on a few aspects of checking our soil and our plants so we can tell during the growing season if we've got too much water, we're giving too much water, or perhaps not enough water. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Kathy Hick. She normally teaches this class, but wasn't able to do so today. So she graciously provided her notes and some of her materials to me. So much of what I am presenting in these slides comes from her. So at the surface, you know, it would seem a watering thing to do. You go out there and you give your plants some water and just watch them grow. But actually there's a little bit of science to it. There's some technique involved, and there's also an important water conservation aspect to what we do in the garden. Many of you probably know that we use huge amounts of water each year in the garden. And our water bill is by far and away the largest aspect of our yearly budget. So one of the things we have to think about is, as we go through the year, are we giving our gardens too much, and our plants too much water, or not enough water? Either one can actually damage or kill our plants. Also, it's important to think about, are we watering at the right time of day? And how much are we giving the plants at different times during the year? On top of that, each type of a variety of plant might have its own water needs. Some plants love a lot of water. So other plants don't like so much water. And all plants. So if we look at the different stages of maturity of our plants, we start about this time of year, we put our seeds in the ground, or we have little seedlings that are coming up out of the soil. And their water needs are that they need a moist soil for about an inch or two underneath the soil, pretty much constantly. So that requires that we give them water just about every day or every other day, and certainly check the moisture level consistently. That needs to be done in order for the seeds to germinate properly. Transplants, on the other hand, we try to take a different approach. We water those every few days instead of every day. And we start to water a little bit deeper so that the root system can start to penetrate down into the soil. Established plants, as we get further into the year, our goal there is to try to get moisture down to at least 6 inches below the surface and to water even less frequently. Next one. So one of the things that's important for us to do is to kind of watch the soil, check the soil, and check the plants. Those can be important signals as to whether we're giving too much water, not enough water. You can stick your finger down into the soil. That's a simple test, but a very reliable one. Just stick your finger down into the soil 3 to 4 inches early on. If it's moist, you're probably giving your plants enough water. If it's dry, it might be time to give them a drink. Looking at the plants can also be an important thing. Look at the leaves. The leaves can get wilted for a number of different reasons, but giving them too much water or not enough water can cause leaves to wilt. Certain types of plants like tomatoes or peppers, in the heat of the summer, their leaves will naturally wilt during the middle of the day. But if you wait till the end of the day in the evening, you'll notice that they'll recover and you wouldn't need to give them any more water. Next one.
So then we have plants, a lot of our vegetables in the garden require differing amounts of water at certain times. I've got a few examples here. For example, our beans and our corn, our cucumbers, peas, and squash, when they start to flower or fruit comes on them, that means it's time to give them more water. Likewise, carrots and radishes and turnips, our root vegetables, when they're starting to form their roots, they want to drink. Our cauliflower and our broccoli and our onions and potatoes, when they're forming their heads and their bulbs and tubers, they're thirsty. And our pumpkins and our melons, we get toward the end of the season, they're starting to get big. That's when it's time to give them more water. Our plants can fail during the course of the season for a number of different reasons. Certainly overwatering is one of those reasons. You might not think that, but overwatering can sometimes be worse than not giving them enough water. And we'll talk about that directly. Bugs during the middle of the season become kind of a problem for us in the summer. Squash bugs, potato bugs, aphids, tomato worms, those can be problems for us. When it gets humid during the middle of the summer, we get wilt and mildew on some of our plants too. So just keep an eye on all those things. It's not always a matter of too much or not enough water. What happens when we give our plants too much water? What's the result? Well, the root, as it goes down into the soil, actually requires oxygen. The top of the plant, it wants carbon dioxide, but the root requires oxygen. And if the root becomes saturated in water, it becomes deprived of oxygen, and that can damage or kill the plant. A waterlogged root can get fungus on it, and that causes root rot. We've got these little root hairs just below the surface of the soil, and if those get waterlogged, it can kill the root hairs and damage the plant. We like to add fertilizers to our soil, either early or during the year. You know, we add nitrogen or phosphorus, potassium. Well, those fertilizers can be washed away by large high streams of water before they get to the root and into the plant. Also, we're wanting our root to go deep into the soil in search of moisture and in search of nutrition. If we give a large stream of water, flood the plants, it encourages the root to stay shallow instead of going deep. We have natural and also additive organic material we put into our gardens, such as compost. And that compost can assist in giving nutrients into the soil, into the plant. But if we wash the nutrients away from that compost, we've defeated our purpose. And then last but not least, lots and lots of water can encourage pests and diseases. Okay, next one. There are certain things we can do to amend the soil that can help us get a nice, healthy soil that percolates water properly. A loamy soil is considered an ideal soil. It's kind of a mixture of clay and sand and silt. And what that does is it allows for nice percolation of water slowly down through the soil and into the root system. When we add compost to the soil, like the manure piles and such that we have at the back of the garden, we add that into the soil, and that can create a very healthy percolating type of soil. But keep in mind, of course, that you can't just put the compost on top. It has to be worked into the soil either by tilling or by manually turning it. That way you create a nice percolating soil that allows the roots to absorb nutrients and water gradually. Mulch is one more thing that can help retain moisture in the soil. We have gardeners who put straw or hay over the top of their soil during the winter. That helps retain moisture and warmth during the winter. And likewise, mulch in the summer can do the same thing. It helps to retain moisture. Next one. So the big question is, how much water should we give? You know, when have we given enough? When have we not given enough? Well, there's some tests that we can do during the year that help us to determine that. What you want with our transplanted plants and our established plants is to get a nice amount of moisture, at least 6 inches down into the soil. There is a water meter that is available at the shack for testing the soil moisture. Also, there's a coring trowel that's up there that can be used, or if you choose, you can purchase those at the store. But regular monitoring of the soil deep down at that level is important to make a true determination of whether you're giving enough water or not. Also, keep an eye, again, on your foliage. A good example is if you find yellowing leaves that are falling off too soon, often that's a good sign that you're giving your plant too much water. Or a dry brown leaf that's falling off might be an indication that the plant is too dry. What are the things we should try to avoid when we water our garden? So these are the don'ts. Don't, especially during the middle of the summer when it's hot, don't water your plant manually in the heat of the day. That tends to scald the leaves and it tends to cause evaporation, and it's not a conservative way to water our garden. It's important not to water the foliage directly. That causes water loss. It fosters weed growth, primarily because you end up watering outside the foliage zone of the plant. If you water too often and you water lightly, what ends up happening is the root system stays shallow and you don't encourage that taproot to drive deep into the ground. We discourage the use of sprinklers that spray large amounts of water over the foliage and get outside the foliage for the same reasons. Watering outside the foliage zone is just a waste of water and it encourages weed growth. What are the proper ways to water? Well, our mantra kind of is, when we're watering manually, water slow and low. And that means if you're attaching a wand to your hose, put the wand with a very gentle stream down close to the ground and let it water very slowly, percolate deep into the ground. You can use a watering can or a pail to achieve the same thing. When Glenn talks after me, he's going to talk about the use of our automated watering systems, how to set those up, the various kinds, and how those work. But the basic concept is that we try to use a dripper or emitter type system that directs a small amount of water to the base of the plant that will go exactly to the point where the plant root needs the water. Or you can use a soaker hose that could accomplish the same thing. Another thing to keep in mind is when we plant our seeds or our seedlings, it's a good thing to create a shallow basin or a shallow furrow if you have a row of a certain type of plants. And what that does is help retain water where the water is needed down into the root system, and it discourages runoff. As we get closer to harvesting time, our plants right at the end are going to want less water as they try to concentrate sugars in the produce and the fruit. That's going to make for a healthier product and for a better tasting product. As I said, Glenn will be talking to you about the drip systems. There are several advantages to using an automated drip system over manually watering, especially as it gets hot. We know from science that we get increased water efficiency by using a drip system, less loss. We know that plants do better, they're healthier and produce a better product using a drip system. We know that we can avoid moisture-related diseases, pests, and mildew by using a drip system. A flush of large amount high-pressure water into the soil causes compaction and it breaks up the soil and the nutrients in the soil. So using a very slow percolating drip system helps reduce that. And naturally, a drip system helps promote a slow, deep watering system. Okay, final notes. When you're thinking about what you're planting and when you're planting early on, it's a good idea to try to keep water-loving plants together, and plants that don't like so much water together. I think you'll have a more successful garden if you try to organize it that way. As we go starting now on through the season, we have 3 different types of water pipes that we use to water. Right now we're using the so-called ranch spigots, which are the tall maroon colored pipes. They're located in the central pathway, or the road that goes north and south down through the garden. There's 2 of those. And in this case, you use your pail or your bucket and you fill up your bucket there at those ranch spigots, and then you take those back and water your new seeds or your seedlings. When we get close to the point, which should be in the not too distant future, when we're not going to have any more hard freezes, that's when we'll convert over to the purple lines. The purple lines are interspersed amongst the rows of the gardens, and you'll be sharing those purple gardens with those purple spigots with your neighbors. You can attach your hose up to that purple line, and then attach your hose and your wand to your wand, and then be able to manually water your garden that way. Eventually, when we get toward the heat of the summer, that's when we'll convert over to an automated watering system. And the lines we use for that are the yellow spigots that are located at one of the ends at each garden. Glenn will be talking to you about how to set up your system, and different types of manifolds that allow you to set up several types of several soaker hoses to a single manifold. But when we get those set up, there will be a date where we and on the water team begin turning on the system for you. Usually when we turn that water system on, we water approximately 3 times a week. We do it for about 15 minutes per watering. That ends up being altered a little bit depending on how much rain we get or how hot and dry it is. Just to recap kind of what we've covered, spend time learning how to monitor your soil and your plants to find out whether you're giving them too much water or not enough water, or just the right amount, just like Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Remember that plants need differing individual amounts of water as you go through the season. At certain critical times, they require more water than others, and not all plants like the same amount of water. Our mantra in the garden is to water slow and low and deeply for good percolation. Always try to check your soil and your plant leaves and your foliage before you water to make sure that they really do need more water. And mulching is a very good thing to do to help retain moisture in the water, in the soil.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm here at the Payson Community Garden in Payson, Arizona. I've just finished giving a presentation about how I like to determine the water needs of my plants in my garden based on the type of plants that I put in, based on the time of year that I put those plants in, based on my examination of the plants and the soil, so I can help determine if I'm getting enough water or too much water. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we go about briefly setting up a watering system for the garden, the different ways that we water in the garden, and how you might think about setting up your garden according to the plants you have, and put that in the context of
think we lost the video and the audio.
Flexible that way. It also lends itself, these soaker hoses, to plants that are high in density. So your lettuces, your spinach, your carrots, your herbs, even sometimes beets, I find I like to use the soaker hoses on. The other type of connection is this irrigation drip system type tubing, like this one. And you can buy these parts again at the local garden store. What they do that's different than the soaker hose is that they have usually a 3/4 inch tubing like this one, and you can buy a connector here that you just insert the tubing into and it screws onto your valve. And that can be run either in a straight line as a furrow, or if you want to, bend it around to fit different types of plants, you can do that. But eventually what you end up doing is connecting either a small emitter, pronged emitter, directly to that hose, or you connect to that a 1/4 inch drip line. And, it's pretty simple how you do that. You punch a hole into the tubing and you use a connector such as this is a barbed coupler that allows you to connect either the drip line or the emitter directly to the tubing. And then that, in the case of the drip line tubing, you can run that directly to the plant where it becomes a dedicated supply of water. So these are examples of a 1/4 inch emitter drip system tubing. They sell these in two types. One is where it has a pre-perforated hole at pre-designated distances. So it, in effect, works somewhat like a soaker hose, but it will be further apart so you can direct it to the plants you want. Or they sell them as non-perforated 1/4 inch drip lines, which then can be connected directly to what we call an emitter or a dripper. And there are different types of drippers or emitters. One thing we like to discourage here in the garden is ones that spray, that stand up like this and spray more like a sprinkler. And the reason we don't like that is because it tends to evaporate and it's not a very economical use of water. And we also tend to discourage what we call these adjustable drippers. Sometimes they accidentally get turned and you're getting a lot more water dispense than you want to. So we try to get people to use these constant flow drippers. Usually they're between about a half a gallon per hour up to a couple of gallons per hour. And you can adjust that emitter depending on what you think your soil needs. Ideally, a good loamy soil, I have found that a half a gallon to a gallon an hour is sufficient. If you have a real sandy soil, more water is going to go down through, and so you might need a little bit higher volume. Here's just another example of a flat soaker hose. Again, that can be bought either. Soaker hoses can come either as round or flat. Sometimes you can purchase an entire system without have to worry about the individual components. So this is an example of that. You just buy this entire box, and it has everything pretty much that you need to set up your system. This is one more type of 1/4-inch soaker system. This is the one, again, that can be connected to your tubing, your irrigation system tubing, and then this actually works like a soaker hose. Just a couple of last things to wrap this up is I wanted to mention that when I use the tubing system and emitters, dedicated emitters at a plant, I try to use those on plants that I think are going to benefit from having a dedicated amount of water to that plant. And those in general are going to be the ones like the tomatoes, the potatoes, maybe the cucumbers that are going to grow a little, the plant base is going to be a little further apart, and they're going to require more water. The discussion about water use in general, whether to use a soaker system or a drip system, emitter system, really a lot of it has to do with water conservation and water management. Even though the plot is small, collectively we use huge amounts of water here in the garden every year. In fact, it's by far and away the largest portion of the budget for the garden. So anything we can do to make watering more efficient and beneficial for the plant and save water at the same time, we try to do. When you're watering in the spring manually, as I said, you're going to use a hose with a wand like this, and the rule we kind of like to use is to water slow and low to give the water a chance to percolate down. When you first plant your seeds and your seedlings are first coming up, you're going to want to water, as I said before, frequently and shallow. And as the plants continue to mature, then you're going to want the roots to go down further and seek water, so you have to water deeper. There are a number of ways you can do to test that. You know, I talked about earlier in the slide presentation about a water meter. This is real simple. If your plant is young, you can just go down a little bit where those shallow roots are to find out whether you got enough moisture. If you've got a more mature plant that's going to have deeper roots, you can push that all the way down to check to see if you've got moisture down there. Likewise, we have this little instrument up at the shack that can be used. It's called a moisture core sampler or trowel. And you can do the same thing. You can either put this into the soil shallow and bring up a sample to see what kind of moisture you got 2 or 3 inches down. Or if you're looking at to find out whether your larger plants have got moisture down 6 inches or so, you can get a sample and bring that up, and you can kind of get an idea of whether you've got moisture enough down there towards the bottom. The last thing I'll say here with regard to water conservation and retention is the advantages of using mulch. Organic mulch, such as this straw mulch, is very effective. There are other types of organic mulch, but this is the one that I like. And the advantage of having mulch, winter and summer, is that it will insulate the soil in the winter. It'll help keep the soil relatively warm. In the summer, it'll help keep the soil relatively cool. And it also, of course, helps the soil retain moisture. So that will help tremendously in your watering efforts. What I will do is this year is when I put my drip system down or my soaker system down, I'll go ahead and take this mulch that I had over the winter and I'll just put it over the hose. And that way I get the most benefit from watering with the drip system. The water won't have to soak down through the mulch before it gets to the soil, and I'll get all the benefits of the mulch at the same time. Last thing I'll say just in wrapping up is try to be conscious of how and when you water in your garden. Doing it arbitrarily is probably not the best solution. I find that if you're out here on a regular basis, watching your garden, nurturing your garden, looking at the plants, looking at the foliage to see if it looks like it's had too much water or not enough water, testing the soil, those are all things that are really important in determining the water needs of your garden.
Okay, Dan, great job there. I see you've got a slide here for us telling us when next week's presentation with Marion and Teresa to talk about covers. I do want to apologize to our listeners that the phone rang here, and so I muted my microphone, not realizing that that also would mute the video. And so I've only done this a few times, and so I keep, if I'm going to learn out how to screw something up, I'm going to learn it on while you're live. So anyway, you were talking about different types of hoses when you got started there. Did you notice, did you lose the video, the audio also, Dan?
Yes, I did.
Okay, do you know what you were talking about there? I think you covered it again later because I could hear it, but some reason it.
Yeah, it was just the basics of the different types of hoses and different types of manifolds. We have what we call these manifolds that we use to, sorry, my phone's ringing, apologize. And I was demonstrating the different types of manifolds that are available. The manifolds usually have 4 different valve connections that allow you to set up the hose, 4 different hoses. So if you've got a couple of different soaker hoses and a couple of different types of tubing, that allows you to have different setups for different types of water needs.
Yeah, and you went into more depth of it as you went. It was kind of just a little introduction to them. And I really appreciate the water conservation efforts you guys try to do, you know, because we can water too much and plants aren't necessarily taking advantage of it. They can be damaged by it and it just wastes water. Did want to ask about, and I've got a few questions and answers coming in here, but I wanted to ask you about the straw that you're using as mulch. When I go to look for products, sometimes it has a tacking, I don't know, don't try to hold it in place. Have you seen that? What do you just get the straw for the horses, or what do you get for that straw?
I bought mine at the local feed store. The one thing you just have to be careful about, and I don't know if there's a good way to do that, is, if it's got weeds or some other type of grass in it, that can create a little bit of a problem. Actually, I had, with that straw that I bought, I had a little bit of some type of grass that was coming up, and I had to pull that out. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to. While I like the straw mulch, I like it because it breaks down easily, and actually, I will end up turning some of that into the soil because it'll eventually kind of help become compost. But also, you just don't know if you're going to get some extraneous weeds or grass in there.
Yeah, I think you may be able to look for something that's called certified weed-free hay, and that might be a way to avoid it. But even that allows a 0.1% or 0.01%, where you just may still get a weed. You gotta keep on top of them. So Stephanie Lampert asked her first question. She wants to know, as far as mulch and wood chips in the vegetable garden to help control moisture, are cedar chips okay to use on the surface to help control bugs? And is there a particular type of mulch or wood chip problematic as for a food garden?
You know, I haven't used any of the other. We use wood chips in the aisles to help keep weeds down and keep dust down and things. And I haven't actually tried using anything other than the straw mulch. I probably would defer that question if there are members of the staff at the garden who are present, would like to respond to that. I think I remember some conversation about them discouraging us from using the larger wood chips as mulch.
Um, Raise your hand if you're a Payson Community Garden on the team there, and I can, have you help answer that question, because your hand raising should put you at the top. And I just want to mention a little bit with using wood chips is it's often wise to put down a thin layer of your rich compost and then putting the cedar chips on top, or any of the wood chips on top of that compost, because the high carbon portion of those chips, they're going to be drawing nitrogen out of the soil. So if you've got a compost or a manure next to those chips, then they're going to draw that nitrogen. And as that gets wet, it'll work itself into the soil. Okay, here, Susan, I've got you up. So go ahead and unmute and you can help us with that question.
Hi, Chris and Dan and everybody else. I use really fine shredded pine wood for my mulch that I get for like $7 a bale, either at Tractor Supply or at the feed store. And it works really, really well. I put down 2 to 3 inches and over my watering system like Dan suggested. And I do put down good compost or mulch underneath it, because the nitrogen does get pulled out of the first few inches of your soil, but then further down where the roots are, it's okay. And then at the end of the season, I either scrape them to the side and then re-amend my soil, or like this year, I just turned them all in to become part of my soil. Hope that helps.
And before you go, Susan, I guess as long as I keep you up there, you're there. Particular problems with mulch or wood chips that are problematic for food gardens?
I know that you don't want to put walnut in the garden. That will kill things, but I haven't seen much of the mulch that's used in our garden that's caused any problem. One of our gals uses a lot of cardboard for her gardens, and lots of people use straw. I am probably the only one right now that is using the real fine chipped wood, but people have come over and looked at it, so there may be more than that going on this year, but we haven't found anything that we really shouldn't use, except for the inorganic or the organic plastics and things like that some people might want to use.
Have anything to add to that, Dan?
No.
Okay. All right. Susan asks, this is another Susan with an S, that she sees her using a lot of chicken manure. I think it might be horse, but any manure on the gardens. I was told you can put small cans with the ends removed next to the plant. What does he think? I think they're trying to make sure that the manure doesn't get in contact with the stem of the plant.
Yeah. Actually, stay tuned about a more extensive discussion in a couple of weeks about how I amend my soil with a different compost and manure. There are just a couple of basic rules that I like to use when it comes to manure. Um, any herbivore type manure, such as chicken manure or horse manure, cow manure, is fine. But the critical part of it to prevent plant burning, in addition to trying to keep it a little bit away from the plant itself, is to use what we call seasoned manure, and that takes several months. We have a seasoned manure, horse manure pile at the back that we use in spring to allow gardeners to put into their garden and turn it into the soil. I use that, but I also use, as long as it's organic, I get it at the local plant for a nursery, um, seasoned composted manure. Can be chicken manure, another type. I use chicken manure this year, and then I just turn that into my soil. But I also like to test my soil. There's a test kit you can use that will help you determine if you're nitrogen depleted, and that will to some extent help you decide whether you need to add lots of nitrogen or a little bit of nitrogen or no nitrogen in the form of manure and other types of amendments.
Okay. So switching over to some of the chat questions, Jeannie very kindly commented on my muting, saying she always messes up on Zoom meetings too. And so thank you. And then yes, I mess up all the time too. And Madeline has a good question here. She says she's been gardening for 50 years, but in Wisconsin. Now she's trying to figure out how to do it in Arizona. They're setting up the drip system. Currently, she has it set for 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. for 20 minutes. So you went into quite a bit about when to water for different species plants at different times. So Madeline, we're going to assume you're talking about your vegetable garden and you're just getting started. So just kind of summarize some of that timing for your garden drip system.
Wow, it's I don't know exactly what climate she's in, but climate has a lot to do with it. Here in Payson, we're at about 5,000 feet. In July and August, it gets pretty warm, and that's when we're in the middle of our automated watering system. We usually go from manual watering to the automated system watering around late May. And then we try to encourage the gardeners to use almost exclusively the watering system, the auto watering system here. And how that works is we have a water team, which I am on, and we have a system where we manually turn on the watering system usually 3 days a week. And your plants that are being watered by that system will get watered about 15 or 20 minutes per time. So, you could look at it at our climate at that time of year, we're watering about 3 times a week for 15 or 20 minutes. Now that will vary depending on how much heat we've got going on and whether we've had any rainstorms. And then it's more or less up to the gardener to look at their plants on a regular basis and say, well, is the auto watering system giving my plants that I've got here enough water or too much water? And you might have to do some additional watering depending on the type of plant. But also, of course, it depends a lot on elevation and climate.
Yeah, and Madeline, so you may want to find the master gardeners in your county. If it's Hilo County, you just go ahead and email me. That should have been in one of the messages that you would have learned about this, ckjones@arizona.edu, and I can help you out with that as well. But as you know, this isn't Wisconsin. The water doesn't come out of the sky, at least not very often, and not when you need it. So, so it's a little more difficult. Yeah, so she's in Payson. The garden's going to open up there. Go visit and watch this video over. He went into a lot of that stuff, and it takes a while to figure it out. Okay, Catherine asks, I buy the chopped straw that is sold as chicken bedding. I have not had weeds come up in it. It is sold in a bag and not a bale. So that's one that she likes, the chopped straw for the chicken bedding.
Sounds like a good suggestion.
Yeah. And Garis asked, is fresh pine mulch okay to use? Does it need to age? So there's a good question. What do you say about the pine mulch?
Again, Susan probably knows more about pine mulch than I do. I use straw mulch, but as far as I know, what you buy commercially should be ready to use, and it can be used, as I said, in my straw mulch. The thing I like about it, and really I guess this applies to any fine mulch for sure, is that you can use it on top of the soil both summer and winter as an insulator and moisture retention. But also I take some of that and I just turn it into my soil when I turn my soil, and as it ages, it's going to essentially become a real carbon rich compost for you. That's a real important additive.
Good. Susan, anything to add to that?
I don't know about fresh pine chippings if you're doing it yourself. I've never used those. The ones that I use have been somewhat kiln dried, and that again, it's a hamster. It can be used for hamster bedding and things like that. So I don't know about the fresh pine.
I would say you typically do want to age it. It has terpenes and just time for it to do that. And as you said, as Dan was saying, it's a carbon rich thing. You need to break down. It needs to add with manure, with nitrogen to help break it down. But yeah, you can, I'd say, use those pine chips. And so that's why it's good to use them as your mulch. That ages them, and then you're able to work it into your compost later. And so next question is do you use shredded paper for mulch?
I don't. I know it is used by folks as an organic source of mulch and eventually compost in the soil. Again, I defer to Susan. I don't know if there is an element of the ink in the paper that we would discourage or not. Susan, you have any comment on that?
I don't. I wonder if Anita's on, because she and Mary have used shredded paper. But from what I remember seeing from Anita, it looked like it was plain shredded paper without ink on it.
Your newspapers, your printer, typical stuff. They're soy-based inks these days, but if you get into magazines and some of that high gloss stuff, I wouldn't use that for mulch. And so shredding your mail and news, those are all really good. And oftentimes you want to go through use it in your compost, make it into compost first, and then use it. Shredded paper for mulch, I guess you got to keep it wet or it's going to blow away. So I guess everything can blow away except for the chips. So that's why chips are good.
I would just add, I don't know how much I emphasized in this particular presentation about the fact that we are a 100% organic garden at Payson Community Garden. So we do everything we can to avoid any synthetic additives, chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides. So anything we can do to keep it 100% organic, we do.
Good. So Margaret tells us that Tractor Supply also carries small bales of shredded straw that tends to stay in place better. So some more idea. Everybody's about covering the soil today. This is really good. And so Susan asked about breaking down the chicken manure. How are you breaking down your? So anyway, the manures you're using, just a little more detail on that. Do you just let time break it down, or what?
In the case of chicken manure, I buy that from the local plant fair nursery, and it's already aged and seasoned in the package, and it's usually mixed with compost, so I don't have to worry about that. And likewise, the horse manure that we get and we have at the back of the garden, that sits there for several months. So it's not what we call hot manure that you have to worry about it burning the plants.
Good. And Barry comments that currently newspapers use a soya ink, which is safe for food. That's what I understand as well. So just stay away from newspaper, any magazines that are glossy and color and things like that. Black and white is perfect. And so we're getting towards the end of our questions here. If people have some more questions, go ahead and put them in. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my closing slides here. Matter of fact, before I do that, let me make sure you have the evaluation link handy. And if you take just a moment to open that up, give me some information on that. There's only a few questions, take a minute or two. I really appreciate it. So to bring this to a close here, here's Dan again. And so thank you very much, Dan. I really enjoyed your presentation today and learned a lot about how to irrigate and water.
Glad to help.
Yeah, thank you. And as I just did there, please complete the webinar evaluation. Look for the link in the chat box. And here's our closing slide. We are doing the Payson Community Garden Spring Gardening class series presently. Next webinar will be Thursday, March 11. We've got Mary Schulte and Teresa Corrigan talking about garden covers, which, when, and why. So the Payson Community Garden makes good use of different covers at different times of year, different materials to help to just be more successful with their crops, extend the seasons, protect from insects. I think we're going to be very excellent program learning about that. So at this time, I'm going to take another look at our chat boxes. And we are done. Dan, we'll have Dan back in a couple of weeks here. He's going to be going in about how to be successful as a gardener and how to take care of your soils and just get into this a little bit more. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a good weekend and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.